So today we're going to continue our look at the Renaissance and some of the individuals who shaped it. The Renaissance had obviously lots of people who, created wonderful works of art, some of the most, amazing writings, philosophies, inventions. To look at them all would be an entire course. And if you're planning on doing history in university and they offer a course in the Renaissance, I highly recommend it because you will be um, just blown away by the amount of genius which existed during this period. Um, so for our purposes today, we're going to focus on some of those individuals who I want to highlight as being kind of, people who are perceived as the key players in the Renaissance. And the place that we're going to start is not a person, but a family. And this family is known as the Medici family. Now, the Medicis were a very rich and powerful family, and they controlled the banks in the city of Florence. Matter of fact, their banks are going to start in Florence, and they're going to branch out throughout all of Europe. They're going to lend money to businesses, people, kings, and even popes. That's how rich they were. And it's amazing how powerful and rich this family became because of their very humble beginnings. They get their start in the back of a walnut shop. Yes, a walnut shop. You aren't nuts. Bad joke, I know, but that's okay. The first Medici to get this dynasty started was a man by the name of Giovanni de' Medici. He is the man who started this walnut shop. And he's going to be the first Medici to enter into banking. And, he starts off by giving some small loans to people. Giovanni was making a modest income off of his loans. But what really started to make the Medici family take off were the shrewd investments that he would make. He started to invest in small businesses and shipping in the textile industry, which was actually very lucrative for the Medici. And this helped their wealth to grow exponentially. But it would really be his son, Cosimo, who would make things really take off for this family. So Cosimo is going to take the family business to the next level by finding a very creative way to make money. At that time, the Catholic Church had outlawed the charging of interest on loans. Okay, they consider it to be sinful. If you're going to lend money to somebody, lend them money and don't charge them interest. However, Cosimo is going to change this. Okay, he recognized that that's where there was real money to be made. A lot of the bankers who were around during the Renaissance were Jewish bankers, and they did charge interest. This is really the focus of the Shakespeare play, The Merchant of Venice, where the main character, Shylock, is going to lend money. And instead of interest, of course, he wants it paid back in a pound of flesh. And if you've never read or seen The Merchant of Venice, I highly recommend it. So what Cosimo comes up with is a really kind of ingenious idea. If you lend money to people, you can't charge them interest, but you can make them buy products from your nut shop. So people who would borrow money at first from Cosimo would have to buy, some very, very expensive nuts to pay back what they owed him. This is going to make him a lot of money, so much so that, larger and larger loans start to be given out to people. Perhaps the most famous of his customers was a pirate by the name of Balthazar Casa. Casa was considered the scourge of the Mediterranean, but he decided to hang up his pirate's costume and decided that he wanted to get a more lucrative position in a very corrupt church. We'll be looking at that in a future lesson. So he doesn't want to start off by being, a parish priest. Casa wants to start off by being a cardinal. And back in those days, you could purchase that position of cardinal. So Casa doesn't quite have the money, so he goes to get the loan from the Medicis. And the Medicis lend him the money, and he becomes a cardinal, and he becomes a very powerful cardinal. So much so that He is going to make it up the ranks of the church, and in 1410, he will be named Pope John 23rd. Sometimes he's called the anti-pope. You'll find out why in the future. So the Pope repaid the Medici by only doing business with them. So this meant that all church business became Medici business, and the family came to be known as God's bankers. And even after John the 23rd was no longer Pope, the Medicis were the ones who were taking in the money that were coming in from parishes, and they would have this job for hundreds of years. So Medici banks soon popped up in every major city and town, and all the money coming back to them was going to Florence, because of course, they were charging fees for their banking services. So Cosimo was perhaps the richest man to live during his time. He had more money than most kings had, and this quick rise to power and wealth is going to take this once very modest family into the center of Florence politics. Other families in Florence, other rich families in Florence, decided that they wanted to halt them. And perhaps, the two families who worked the most to stop them were the Albizzi and the Pazzi families. And they are going to, at one point, actually exile Cosimo, claiming that he was a threat to the city of Florence. That's not going to stop him. Cosimo is going to return to the city in 1434 after public opinion of the Albizzi family changes, and people asked him to come back. And right away, he's going to gain a prominent position in the government. It's only a matter of time before he is going to rise to the top. And, using his power base and his supporters, he's going to gain control of the Signora, the council that controlled all the city's affairs. He's going to build his allies very carefully, and when the time came for it, he banishes the Albizzi family to get them out of his way. The Pazzi, they're allowed to stay, but they are now firmly, under his control. To get the people on side, he's going to pay all of the taxes of those people who owned money, so they would continue to vote for him. And he is going to limit the number of voters in the city so that he could ensure that his family would always be in control. Cosimo was known as a practical man, and he is going to latch on to those humanist principles we talked about. And he's going to pour a lot of money into the arts. He's going to collect books and paintings from around the world. He's going to build great libraries and a palace for himself, which is going to rival that of any of the rulers in Europe at that time. After his death, his palace is going to be transformed into the center of cultural life in Florence. It's also Cosimo who's going to bring an end to the ongoing war between many of Italy's merchant cities. He's going to use his money and his influence to buy peace. Basically, with all of the riches that he had, all of the control that he had in businesses, he's going to call together these merchant cities and say, look, what we're doing here is bad for business for all of us. The fighting's got to stop. And if it doesn't stop, your money in the Medici banks will be frozen. So he has that influence there. And those battles, they come to an end, and prosperity is going to take over in Italy. Now, as great as Cosimo was, it would be his grandson, Lorenzo, who would really cement the Medici name to the age. Lorenzo is going to fully embrace this notion that the Medici were the unofficial princes of Florence. And you can understand why. Lorenzo is going to grow up being trained in the humanist traditions, and he's taught from the time he's a small boy on how to be a ruler. His father, a man by the name of Pietro, ruled Florence for 5 years after Cosimo's death. And during that time, he gave his son this very important job of being the chief diplomat for the Medicis, so he could become better accustomed to the ways of politics and get to know the leaders of Europe. And so, as a teenager, Lorenzo traveled all over the kingdoms of Europe to do business and was always met with a reception that was really kind of something we only saw for other members of royalty. It's during this time, too, that he became a great lover of art and would become, when he was the head of the Medici family, one of the top patrons of Italy's top artists, um, and helped to spread their influence. Lorenzo was felt to be a leading citizen in Florence, and he was believed by the people to be the true possessor of virtue. And, it's under his rule that party, political party of people that Cosimo created to ensure the Medicis remained in power, he moves away from that and mainly is going to rule through power and influence. And he's able to do this because he's got a great personality. He's very charismatic, okay? And, he plays politics very, very well. And where we kind of see this start to happen is after he survives an assassination attempt by the Pazzi. Now, I want you to pause right here because I've included a link to this conspiracy, and I want you to go and watch it. Okay? Don't worry, I'll stop and I'll wait for you to come back.